So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
One thing you can give to your kids that will help them live a happier life, and a happier life as an adult. You know, so often parents say, I don't understand why my kids left their faith. I don't understand why they're doing what they are doing now. Perhaps they're living an adverse lifestyle from what you taught them and raised them to live, essentially. So what's this one thing that will help your kids live a happier, healthier life as adults? And you may even want to work on this yourself. It's International Women's Day, and I want to tell you about two saints who, if you haven't heard their story before, pretty profound to think about on a day where we celebrate women, yet we forget about motherhood, and they were moms. So we will talk about that in a little bit. Also, if you want your prayers to be answered, there's something you have to do. We're going to talk about that a little later on during the show. My guest in just a little bit is celebrity and royal matchmaker Cristina Pineda. We're going to talk about whether or not perhaps your relationship is stealing your joy, and really how to bounce back after a breakup and whether or not you should break up. That is the question. Now, whether you're in a dating relationship or not, this is something that I have found so often. People have come to me going through this situation about their love life, and ultimately the question that they're asking that they aren't actually verbalizing out loud is, should I or should I not be with this person? Should I or should I not date them? So how do you answer that question? That is what we'll answer with matchmaker Cristina Pineda. Here's a question I have to ask you during our happy hour, because I think it's an important one. And if you haven't joined us here on Trending before, hi, I'm Timmerie, and every Monday we talk about being happy, ultimately being joyful, because happiness is an emotion that is fleeting. But joy is a virtue that is rooted in God, and whether or not we are in challenging circumstances that make us sorrowful, anxious, fearful, we can still have joy in our hearts. And so that's why we talk about happiness every single week here. So if there's something you would like to hear discussed related to happiness, let us know. The number's 1-888-914-9149. Again, that's 1-888-914-9149. So here's the deal. Have you ever been unhappy? Maybe even mad at God because he didn't answer your prayer? Let's be honest, I think most of us at some point, even if we weren't mad at God, I can't say I've ever been mad at God. There have been moments where I've said, why? But I haven't been mad at him. But many people do find themselves upset with God. They punish God. They'll stop praying. They'll stop going to church. They'll stop being happy. Well, why? God didn't answer my prayer. I was talking to someone recently, and they shared with me that their daughter-in-law had been praying and praying for a particular petition. And they ended up praying a novena for this petition. Well, the petition wasn't answered. So what did they do? The next week, they stopped going to church. Stopped raising their kids Catholic. Now, sure, they were still sending their kid to a Catholic school, but the petition wasn't answered, so vindictively, they stopped going to church. Maybe you know someone who's done that. Maybe you have. Call us. I would love to talk to you. Maybe you stopped going to church because God didn't answer your prayer, and so it made you unhappy. There's this really funny story. So I've mentioned before, I really don't like working with little kids. I'm just not a fan. They're bratty. I think it has to do with parenting, especially the whole never tell my child no thing. Oh, the one big mistake I made was helping out for Vacation Bible School. I did not want to go back. I was in, I think maybe high school or something. I volunteered. Whew, that was a rough week. But I love working with middle school kids. Always have such a fun group. They're intelligent enough to know things, but still young at heart enough to be fun and do goofy things. So I was on retreat with these kids one year. And there was this girl, that girl, who asked a question over and over and over again. I will be honest, she was annoying, okay? She was annoying, and luckily, I kind of played that tool like, oh, go ask the youth minister every time she had a question. Go ask the youth minister and get out. I'm just a volunteer. Go ask him. And so at one point, she's asking question after question. I remember he looked at her, and he's like, what do you want now? And he made it very clear, like, what? I've answered so many of your questions. Why do you keep asking me questions? And she goes, well, Jesus said, ask and you shall receive. So I just don't stop asking. Oh, those poor parents. Ask and you shall receive. See, I think there's a problem when we really do believe that ask and you shall receive means ask and you will get exactly what you want. The reality is we actually don't know what we want most of the time. And we also don't know what's good for us. So has God forgotten about you if he doesn't give you the petition you asked for? Does he hate you because he allowed you to sit in that petition for a year, 2 years, maybe longer? No. You see, we have to remember there are answers God gives us, and perhaps he's not coming to us in a cloud, a Shekinah glory cloud, or speaking from heaven, or appearing to us in a dream. But there are 3 things that happen. The petition's answered, that's a yes. The petition's not answered, that's a no, or a not yet. So perhaps your petition is something that must be answered. It is a situation that must change, a person that must be transformed. Perhaps it's a not yet. You see, God allows us to go through things to bring about ultimately our growth and our salvation. It's just a matter of whether or not you and I will participate in that opportunity for growth. Whether we will participate in the salvation that he is offering to us. You see, we make progress in the spiritual life when we endure through suffering, when we turn to our Lord in suffering. But here's the problem. Many people turn to God when they need something. But they don't turn to God when they don't need something. So if that's the case, do you think that perhaps God would allow us to need things so that we could be more dependent on him? Not out of cruelty, not out of hatred, not out of punishment, but out of love. Because he loves us so much that he wants us to be closer to him. And so he's not just going to give everything to us. He's going to allow us, like any good parent, to work for what we need and what we want. It's a challenge for each of us to think about this. Making progress in the spiritual life, working toward a participation in our salvation, working out our salvation, that is, means that we have to endure through our petitions. And later on today, if you want your prayer petitions to be heard, if you want them to be answered, listen, because a little later on, I'm going to tell you what the spiritual doctors and early church fathers and saints before us have said. If you want your petitions answered, I'll give you the play-by-play on what to do to make that happen. Because it's not just about getting what you want, but it's about interior transformation and sometimes, ultimately, the goods that we desire. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. My guest today is Cristina Pineda, and perhaps you have something to share. And we're going to take some callers in just a minute here. But I want to start to dive into this. Cristina, you're a celebrity matchmaker. You work in Hollywood and some of the major cities across the nation. And it's our weekly happy hour here. And I was really excited when you agreed to come on to talk about how sometimes your relationship can steal your joy. And in just a little bit, we'll talk about whether or not you should break up with someone. But let's talk about how some people find that their relationships are really impacting them. And a great example is the explosive divorce. I think a lot of people saw the writing on the wall of Kanye West and Kim Kardashian. Welcome to Trending.
Thanks, Timmerie. So good to be on with you. And you're right. It's Kanye and Kim's divorce has brought this topic of breaking up to the forefront. Of course, as Catholics, we're not advising people to get divorced, but this does bring up the question about, are you in the right relationship if you haven't gotten married yet? And Lent is the perfect time to examine your relationships, to examine, and if you're married, examine your friendships and see if these are relationships that are bringing you closer to God and bringing you joy most of the time, or leading you further away from God and giving you that empty feeling that the wrong relationships do. So I'm really happy that we're talking about this during Lent, because a lot of times people have the space, can create the space, are cutting out things that might be distracting them from the real issues in their relationship that we normally do, our habits that might distract us. And you can really dive deeply into these issues. So I want you to ask yourself, if you're listening, I want you to ask this question: is your relationship bringing you joy or bringing you down? And an example from a bachelorette who I coached was that she was dating a man who was very serious about her, and they were both very serious about their faith, but he almost told her he wanted to marry her from day one. He was just gung-ho.
Red alert, red alert.
I have had bachelorettes who I've coached who that's actually been the case. The guy was really into her in the beginning, and now they're in a happy marriage. So sometimes it isn't, but
okay,
this
but
situation...
there's a difference between wanting to get married and I think some Catholic women have said they don't like going to young adult events because they feel like cattle lined up for all the Catholic men who are wife hunting. That's a legitimate thing. It is. Okay, but keep going because I want to hear this.
Yeah, no, I hear. And that's what she felt really flattered in the beginning, as we all do when we get attention and an attractive man is interested. But then and also it was the honeymoon period. It was that beginning, there was romance. He was bringing her out. They were just going out to the best restaurants. But then she started getting a little more used to the relationship, and she started thinking that maybe he was in love with the idea of who she was rather than her.
Ooh,
and that she was this
perfectionism, among other things.
Yeah. And the fact that she's Catholic, she's into her faith. He wanted that as well. And she just felt like he was putting her into this box that she didn't actually fit into. And then during Lent, we were working together, and she examined her life. And I told her, well, think about that same question. Do you feel more joy and more yourself and more free to be yourself in this relationship or outside of the relationship? Even if he fits all the criteria of what you're looking for. So she took the time to realize that actually she felt so much more free when she wasn't with him, and it was so painful to break up, but she needed to do it. It wasn't the right person for her. He wasn't the right person for her.
Isn't that hard? And often I think a lot of people on both sides, male or female, feel happier without the person they're dating, but it's become such a habit. It's become comfortable because then they won't be lonely. It's kind of become the thing they do. Maybe they have, a couple date nights a week, or that's who they hang out with on the weekend. And then there's also that comfort, but also then this idea of, well, I feel bad if I break up with this person, especially women. Women tend to not break up because they feel bad.
That's a good point. And they just keep stringing it along further. And a lot of times those relationships can also be the toxic relationships where they're taking a lot more from the person than just time. The toxic relationships are ones that can be really demeaning. And that is something that, is this person a manipulator who you're dating? Are you with this person for the right reasons? Are they using you for the right reason? Are they with you for the right reasons? Are they using you? So, and that can go into friendships as well, as I was mentioning. So people who are listening, even if you're married and you feel like, oh, this doesn't really apply to me, it does. Think about who you're spending your time with, because who we spend our time with is who we become. And are these friendships ones that are bringing us and helping us become more like the Lord? or are they deterring us from that pathway?
Okay, a great example, Christina, along these lines of maybe someone's going, well, okay, I see the writing starting to be on the wall. Maybe I should break up with this person, but they have a birthday coming up, or but this is happening. One listener just wrote in about how he broke up with someone before the holidays, and she said she was going to break up too, but wanted to wait until after the holidays. And what's funny about this, Christina, is I remember one time waiting until after Christmas to break up with someone because I felt bad breaking up with them right before Christmas. And then during Christmas vacation, I was in college, they end up having this like tell-all and share all these things about their life. And I feel bad again about breaking up with them because it was one of those, you changed me, I'm a better person now. So I think I waited like another month and a half and then broke up with him on Super Bowl Sunday, which a lot of the people said, okay, so you waited until after the holidays, but then broke up on the Super Bowl? Come on. I waited till after, okay?
Oh, that's funny. Oh, I just think that I know you're right. A lot of people feel bad, but I always tell people the longer you're with this person, the longer you're taking them away from finding the person that is meant for them. Right. So try to really examine your motives for being in the relationship. And no time is, Timmerie talks about how no time is the right time to get married. No time is the right time to buy a house or have children. No time is the right time to break up with someone. But Lent comes close. We say the whole thing about cuffing season in the matchmaker industry. Cuffing season is the time that is actually, it does relate with handcuffs, but that has to do with the time around the holidays where people are lonely, want to be in relationships, and tend to couple up more frequently. The spring tends to be the beginning of the end of that so that you can set free for summer and have your fun.
Okay, if you are single and you are listening right now, please do not participate in cuffing season. I don't want to say that's like the lowest of the low, and I understand wanting to have a date for New Year's, but dating someone is definitely different than cuffing them and insisting on the define the relationship conversation. I love that. So holidays is cuffing season. It's over now. Lent is the best time to cut ties. That's hilarious.
Yep. And something that I wanted to bring up here is, and I actually tell this to all of our members, all the members I coach, not just the Catholic members, but do pray the Ignatian exercises when you're discerning a relationship, because I always say dating is discernment. And you want to learn about the Ignatian exercises to begin with. So you can easily do that online or do a retreat or do an online course, something like that. But the general gist of it is, like I mentioned before, is this person generally bringing me more joy in my life? Or do I often feel unsettled? And bring it to prayer, bring it to your weekly Eucharistic adoration hour, Eucharistic, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever time you spend with the Lord. That's something wonderful to do for Lent, to add to your life so that you can really add this discernment there and talk to the Lord about your relationship and go through your emotions and your feelings on a day-to-day basis, journal about it and see. And our emotions are fleeting. So sometimes we will have flare-ups, and some of us are more anxious than others. Even if it is the right person, you might be an anxious attachment style person and just be nervous a lot in relationships. So try to determine whether the anxiety is coming from the person who you're with, that they're making you feel unsettled, whether it's maybe you're nervous that the man has a roving eye, or the woman you're with seems to be hitting on all the other guys when you go out to a young adult event. I'm not sure what your situation is, but that could be a cause of your anxiety. Or it could be, you know what, you don't have a great relationship with your dad, or you don't have a great relationship with your mom. And there's a lot of issues that have come down to you from that. Your parents may have gotten a divorce. You may feel the fold over anxiety from those traumatic experiences. So try to determine where the anxiety is coming from, pinpoint it, and then see, am I happier generally with him or without him, or with her or without her? And
these are so helpful. I think these are good things to kind of meditate through, use the Ignatian exercises, because it's important to really take that time, but also not to delay. Sometimes I think we fall back. People of deep faith often fall back and say, oh, well, I'm going to use my prayer as kind of a crutch of, well, let me pray about it. But they don't really actually discern through that prayer. They kind of just leave it in the Lord's hands without taking action as well.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why I think just prayer is very important, but actively talking to the Lord about it and listening to what he's saying. If you are doing, and I recommend meditating, do Christian meditation daily. I do a half hour of Christian meditation daily. And I found that when there is something in my life that's unsettling me, I won't be able to relax in that meditation. And meditating is great because it prioritizes things for you. So you can see, okay, I actually don't need to do all the 10 things I had on my to-do list, but there's something getting in the way of me relaxing here. What is it? And listen and say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. That comes from scripture when Samuel asked that question. It's a wonderful story. So look that up if you don't know what I'm talking about. But definitely talk to the Lord about it. Sit in Eucharistic adoration, journal of writing. Writing is really helpful. And I used to do a lot of prayer journaling. Now I don't do as much, but I'm also not discerning my future husband right now. So those things are really good to actively pray with the Lord and make some decisions, because you don't want to sit in that anxiety for long. You want to move things closer to God. And maybe this person is maybe a faithful Catholic, but you feel like, you know what, I'm really not, I'm very upset a lot of the time, or I just don't feel that joy of the Holy Spirit that you do when you're pursuing the Lord's will in your life. So that is a little bit of what I would say. And then just for married people, I would recommend figuring out who is necessary in your life, because you don't have all the time in the world with friends. So if people are cutting you down, it may be time to say goodbye to a certain friendship.
That's Cristina Pineda, the celebrity matchmaker from Matchmakers in the City. We'll be back in just a little bit. If you have a question for Cristina, the number is 1-888-914-9149. Has Instagram created a new religion that young people actually do live by? This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. The group of those who identify with no religion, that is, the nuns, continue to grow. Tuesday, I'll discuss this, and we will also be joined by psychologist Dr. Gregory Bottaro to talk about Catholic mindfulness. Join me daily at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
My guest today is Cristina Pineda. She is a celebrity and royal matchmaker, also matchmaking us normal peasants as well. It's Cristina Pineda. We'll come to her in just a moment here. We have John calling from Reno, Nevada to share about how he came back to the church and how it made him happier. Welcome, John. Share with us how you become happier being back in the church.
Hey, Timmerie. What happened to me was this. I got enchanted by liberalism, and I did a lot of work in San Francisco from 2001 to 2014. And I was working for the liberals a lot. And what happened was when my sister had my nephew, I came back to having more conservative views. And all of a sudden, I suffered police abuse, misfeasance, and malfeasance. And I finally found peace listening to Relevant Radio and getting the truth from Relevant Radio.
That's incredible. Isn't that amazing how a baby, not even your own, a nephew, could change your outlook on things?
Yes.
Yeah, how did you end up coming back to Relevant Radio and it kind of leading you back into the church?
I stumbled across the dial in Reno, Nevada.
Praise God. Praise God. That's incredible to hear. John, thank you so much for sharing that with us, because really, I think so often we think that we are trapped by religion, that there are all these rules, all these guidelines, but that is what this weekly hour is about. The fact that our faith, the one holy Catholic apostolic faith, brings true joy, true happiness, and that when we are rooted in it, it changes things. Which is why in just a little bit, I'm going to share with you one thing you can give to your kids that will help them live a happier life and a healthier life into adulthood, and it may even work for you as well. And if you want to hear your petitions heard, what can you do? What does the church, what do the early church fathers teach us about actually having our prayers answered? Cristina Pineda from Matchmakers in the City, a celebrity matchmaker here, is joining us. And I have a question here. So the question is this. This came in through a message just a little bit ago, Cristina. Why is it essentially, and this is from a man, he feels much kind of more affected and lingering feelings when a lady just says no to him before a date versus after going on a couple dates and then finding that it doesn't work out? Why is it that that's worse? And, help me understand how to move on.
Ooh, it's because there's mystery there. That's why, because you have in your mind who this person is. Even if you've not really interacted with them that much, it could even be, I don't know if he's meeting the women in person or online, but often our imaginations take us many places and we think, oh, this person you get a few little details about the person and then we construct their whole character from it and we get attached to that character. Whereas if we go on a date with the person, we realize, oh, they're actually not perfect. And they said this, which I don't agree with. And I wasn't that excited. I thought I was going to be more excited on the date, but it was okay. It may have been boring, but you had hyped it up. And so you don't get that kind of closure when the person says no to you before you even go. That's what makes it challenging. But it's one of those things that we have to trust the Lord with and say, you know what, God? She said no to me, and I'm just going to assume that it would have been one of those dates where I wasn't really into her and then move on from that woman because it's good that she actually gave you a closed door. Right. Often when people are breadcrumbing you or ghosting, you don't get any closure. But when someone actually says no, that is a blessing because you don't have to rethink or rework or reanalyze things. Okay, it's a definite, clear, not my woman. Move on to the next woman as best as you can.
That's a great, Cristina. Thank you so much for answering that question. We're going to touch in just a moment that question of should you break up with the person you're dating? Really important question because sometimes relationships can just steal our joy. And so how do we know if we should break up or not? But Cristina, we have another call that's come in. Joe from Minnesota has a question about abusive relationships. And Joe, before we dive in, I want you to ask your question in a moment here. But share with us a little bit kind of where you're at. I understand that you're in the annulment process because this is important as part of the question.
Thank you first for taking my call. So I absolutely had to call when I heard you broke up with your boyfriend on Super Bowl Sunday because I actually attempted to postpone my marriage the day after the conference championship game to go to the Super Bowl, and our team lost. And my fiance was absolutely upset. I thought she could just be upset about our team losing. No, she was upset because I said, hey, we got to work on stuff. And she basically gave me an ultimatum that I either marry her on the wedding date or she won't marry me at all. And I spent the next 5 months of the engagement scrambling to figure out how am I going to make this work. And I did the Ignatian exercises, and I came to the intellectual conclusion it was a good decision, but my emotions weren't there. It was just I'm an idiot. I might not even marry validly, but I'm going to do it anyway because I just thought, well, maybe if I just mean it at the altar, I'll be good to go. Kind of like going to confession and receiving communion. If you do the act, you receive the sacrament. So... And the entire marriage was just a disaster, and she abused me verbally. She eventually abused our kids. I have the kids permanently now. It turned out infinitely worse than I could ever imagine. Anybody that's in a bad relationship right now, I encourage you just to get the heck out of that relationship. It's going to destroy your life, and it ate my life for years and years and years. I'm so glad I'm out of it. And if it's valid, well, I guess I did what I intended to do, but at the same time, I'd love to even be more free of it too, but I'll just see what God does. As far as I'm concerned, I have to presume I'm married and obey the church.
Yeah. So what's the question, John? Or sorry, Joe.
Yeah,
sorry.
ultimately my question is, like, how do you move on from a verbally abusive relationship? I think it's a great question for a lot of other people to hear, because even, like, sometimes I think about, like, well, hypothetically, if I'm ever free to marry, like, how am I going to handle that aspect? Like, I don't want to just presume everybody's abusive or, like, look for skeletons in their closet and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Great question, Joe. And I want to touch on that question, throw it to Cristina in just a moment. But I commend you because I understand that you are acknowledging my marriage has not been declared null. So currently, I can hear, based on what you're saying, that you acknowledge and you're respecting the church, that means that you are still married and that you're not dating until then. So I just want to be clear for anyone who's listening, because you phrased it beautifully. You said, if, you were to start searching again. So I'm really sorry that you've been through kind of the entire situation you've been through. And I thought it was really fascinating. And we'll probably talk about this in a minute here. The fact that you said you knew you kind of weren't there with the marriage, but you kind of hoped, like with confession, that, the grace would still be bestowed upon you, even if it wasn't a perfect confession, let's say. I'll touch on that in a minute. But just for anyone who's listening, it's important to understand, if you are in the process of going through an annulment, it's not acceptable to be dating, because if you are dating, you are still considered married. Unless the church has declared your marriage null, you are still married. And so with that being said, the question I think that so many people can benefit from that you threw out there, Joe, is if you are in a verbally abusive relationship, how do you recover from that in general, but then also in dating later? So Cristina, if you'd like to take those two questions, that's Cristina Pineda from Matchmakers in the City.
Yes. Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is something that I coach our members on a lot, and it's finding your identity as a son or daughter of the Lord and a prince or princess in his kingdom. That your identity doesn't come from what anyone else says about you, thinks about you, what your job is, which is hard for men especially, any other external factors, what you look like. All of these things tether us to the world, and it's so easy to find our identity in those things. But the more time you spend with the Lord, and Lent is such a great time to make space for that, the more this will become a reality for you. And Joe, it might be looking at your phone less. I know for a lot of people, having an hour or two of phone-free time can help them to have more prayer time. Or you will pray and see what the Lord brings up in your mind about ways to encourage that relationship with him and help you, because you mentioned something, you knew it intellectually, something that but you didn't, your feelings weren't there yet. So this is something you should know intellectually. You probably know it intellectually. Yeah, I'm a prince in the kingdom. Okay. But you want to get there with the feelings. And that's when spending time with the Lord. And that's why I mentioned Eucharistic adoration at the beginning of this as so powerful to really feel that. Start to embody that, yes, this is my presence, this is my confidence. Then when in any relationship that you're in, you will be able to set appropriate boundaries with those people, because people will try to take a lot from us if we let them. Unfortunately, I mean, not everyone is like that, but you will be able to confidently walk in and say, this is what I'm comfortable with. This is language that I am not comfortable with. And you will set that, and you won't feel like, oh, but if I don't allow that, then I won't be with this person. No, you'll know it's better if I'm not with that person. So I think that answers your question as best as I understand it. And Timmerie, if you have any other thoughts, that would be great.
Yeah, I do have a couple thoughts, actually. Two things. One, in therapy, it's so important. Therapists will often talk about how self-affirmation and speaking the truth matters. So when someone is verbally abusive, often they're saying things that aren't true, or they're manipulative or aggressive. And so it's important that you're able to still be comfortable in situations with other people, and that you don't kind of shrivel in on yourself because of that verbal abusiveness. And so saying, they talk about like positive self-talk, where you'd say, be in a particular situation. Let's say someone's made you feel lousy, whether through emotional or verbal abusiveness. You say, well, actually, I'm a really good person. How I handled that situation was fine. Maybe someone said something really awful about the way you dressed or the way you did something today. You can say, I did the best I could at work today, and even if it wasn't perfect, that's okay. You kind of start to say stuff, and it's hard to kind of make it up without being in the particular context. But let's say you made dinner. Let's say someone comes up and just criticizes you. You always make this wrong. You never know how I like my food made. And they just kind of start going on and on and on you. You could, in your mind, and if you need to say it out loud, but at least to yourself, you need to speak truth to yourself. What is real? And you can say, well, I made dinner for this person. They may not like it, but I made dinner, and that was a good thing. And so I think sometimes we have to affirm ourselves when other people aren't affirming us, because a verbal affirmation is so important. And when people aren't verbally affirming one another, it can create confusion about what is and what is not. And so it's our role to always speak what is true, even if sometimes that means speaking what is true to ourselves. So Joe, great question. Our prayers are with you through this entire process for you and your family. Cristina, and if you're just joining us, you're listening to Trending with Timmerie. That's Cristina Pineda. She's a celebrity matchmaker with Matchmakers in the City. And Cristina, let's talk during our happy hour, a few minutes here briefly. How do you know? What are the signs that you should break up so that you can be happier?
Well, something that you had brought up on one of your other episodes, Timmerie, is boredom in relationships and waiting too long to get married. And I think that often people will take boredom as a sign of, okay, it's done. But I think you mentioned that sometimes it's because you're not moving the relationship into the right direction. So that's what I want people to have a clear limit of how long you're going to spend with this person, and talk about it at some point if you haven't already. You don't want to be bringing this up on the first few dates. So you have to be very careful when you talk about time limits in relationships. But it's important to see, and obviously if you're not sleeping together, that's probably the most important thing not to do in order to clearly discern whether this person is right for you. I mentioned before, if you're feeling most days lousy about the relationship, not a good fit for you. If you're feeling most days good, but here and there you have maybe a disagreement, but generally things are good, you have to keep discerning. And don't say no and don't break up until you feel like I've talked to the Lord about it. I've talked to trusted friends, maybe your spiritual director, maybe your parents, if they're close with them and they're wise advisors. You've prayed about everything in depth. Don't make that final decision to break up until you have peace about it. And if you're not peaceful in the relationship, that's the first sign that you should be discerning whether it's the right relationship for you. But I don't want you to get out of it until you know it's wrong for you.
Very important. Okay, quick, last 2 tips here before we have to go.
Okay. So in terms of for breaking up, if they should break up or not.
Yes.
Okay. I want you to, if you're a man, if you don't see this relationship leading to marriage, break up with her immediately. You're stealing her fertile years, and that will be counted against you on Judgment Day. I know that those are intense words. But can you just repeat that?
Because I think a lot of women are appreciative of that, and a lot of men don't think about that.
Yes. Okay. So break up with her if you do not see this leading to marriage. And you are stealing her fertile years. that will be counted against you on Judgment Day. To explain it a little bit more, it's your moral duty as a man to treat women as you would want your younger sister to be treated. And if you know this is not her, you need to let her move on. It's harder for women as women get older to find love than it is for men. And just because you might think, oh, good, I'm a guy. Nope, you have more responsibility there. And for the ladies, break up with him if he's not proposing. And it's been too long after you spoke with him about it. And I know it's awkward, but I've seen these relationships go on for years and years. And I'm thinking, and it's okay, if you have legitimate reasons why you're both not getting married, you're both in school, you're both figuring things out, it's a little different. And you're young, whatever it is. But if you're both in a good place in your careers and you want to get married and the other person is just dragging their feet, you're doing this to yourself almost, that you have to take the reins and say, okay, do you want to be with me or not? Because there is someone who's going to want to be with me, and they'll know sooner. I say a year to 2 years max before you can get engaged. I would say that would be the maximum amount of time. You don't need that long.
Right. And this is so important, Cristina, because I've shared before, my husband and I have said on multiple occasions, we dated far longer than we ever would have liked to. I think by the time we got married, we had dated for something like over 6 years or so. And part of it, student loans, difficult job market and so forth. We could go on and on. I was working as a missionary, and long story short, it hit a point where we both knew we wanted to get married. We believed that both of us were the one, but it wasn't happening. And we had to have those hard conversations of, these are our expectations, but in order to get there, there need to be certain timeline objectives that need to occur on this timeline of, okay, we're giving it a year and X, Y, and Z need to happen over this year. And sure, we may have set specific dates that certain things needed to happen by, and dates were moved out in certain circumstances, but it was important. We talked a lot today about prayer. If we're going to pray for something, we can't just say, hey, God, help me to get married. Well, if you have student loan debt, if you don't have the right job to get married, if you have various circumstances that are preventing that, you have to make a plan in order to make it change. And if you can't try and meet that plan, as Cristina said, gentlemen, if you don't plan on getting married, you need to let her go so that she can move on and have the potential of having children. And ladies, remember the same thing. It's so important that if you expect to get married and the question isn't being popped, expect it. Tell them so that you can move on. And yes, it takes time to get over that breakup, especially when you thought you were going to get married, but you will. Praise God, you will. That's Cristina Pineda from Matchmakers in the City. You can find them. We've tagged them on social media. You can find them at matchmakersinthecity.com, always sharing her candid advice for relationships, dating, and marriage. I'll be right back to share with you one thing that you should know that will help your children be happier in their adult life. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio Studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/forester.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
One thing you can give to your kids that will help them live a happier and healthier life into adulthood, especially young adulthood, I will share with you in just a minute. But yesterday was the feast day of Saints Felicity and Perpetua. That's March 7th. And I learned about them a few years ago from one of those lovely Catholic companies that provided water bottle stickers, and I got my March pack, and I went, wow, I know nothing about these two saints. Yet we hear them sometimes in the canon of the Mass, and they are fascinating. They were some of our early martyrs, the 3rd century martyrs, and Saint Perpetua had a father who was very influential, and she was a Christian. Her father was not. She had a child, actually a little boy, and her father begged her to give up her faith, but she wouldn't. And she had a servant as well who was named Felicity. Now, these two saints ultimately ended up dying in Rome, being fed to the beasts. You can imagine what that was like. And they were both mothers, young mothers. Now, her father begged her, that is St. Perpetua, to give up her faith, and she wouldn't. And at one point, she said this phrase that some of you may have heard before, and I think this is so important today when we struggle to speak up for what is true. She said, "My father, out of love for me, was trying to persuade me and shake my resolution because he knew ultimately where would she end? She would end in the game. She would end being fed to the beasts for entertainment. She said, 'Father,' said I, 'do you see this vase here, for example, or water pot or whatever? Could it be called by any other name than what it is?' He said, 'No.' She said, 'Well, so too I cannot be called by anything other than what I am, a Christian.'" I think that statement is so profound. Her father's asking her, give up your faith. Don't allow yourself to be martyred. Apostatize. Please, my daughter, you will live, you will survive. I can plead for you on your behalf, even though you've been holding to this Christian viewpoint. And for Pete's sake, save your child. Save your child. You are going to die. But she made it very clear. I am a Christian. How could I live in any other way? How could I be called by any other thing? How could I be defined in any other way? She reminds us that we have to tell the truth about ourselves, tell the truth about others, and tell the truth to the world about God and about what is in the world, how the world functions. And even when he pleaded with her not to do this because of her child, she still continued to practice her Catholic faith and was ultimately martyred, leaving behind her little boy, whom her father could care for. And she had a servant, a slave, who was 8 months pregnant as they were facing death. Ultimately, the slave, Felicity, ended up giving birth to the baby just a couple days, baby girl, just before their death. And a Catholic couple, we understand tradition, were able to adopt the little baby. But here are two people who died in public games, killed by wild beasts. They were mothers who chose above all else to pass on what? Their Catholic faith. I think this is important because I was just reading a study from the American Journal of Epidemiology, published by Oxford University Press, and it showed that the thing that changed things for adolescents, for young kids, going into their young adult life, they started with really 14-year-olds basically studying them, is the kids who didn't smoke pot, do drugs, kids who were exposed much later to physical intimacy, sexually transmitted diseases, and various things. These people who decrease their risks had a prayer life in their young adult life. They weren't doing drugs. They didn't have STIs. They weren't engaging in physical intimacy early in life. They actually had a greater sense of volunteering, emotional wholesomeness and processing and expressing their emotions. They had a better sense of forgiving others and a greater sense of mission. Why? Because they prayed. Because they were given a prayer life by their parents. They weren't just said, hey, let's go to church. They were taught to pray. If you want to give one thing to your children to help them from having a drug addiction, from being lonely and depressed in their young adult years, if you want to help them have a mission in their young adult years, don't just take your kids to church. Teach them how to pray. We've said before, prayer changes things. That's the bottom line, because God is real. And while he may say no, not yet, or yes to your prayer, when a young person can learn that early on, when they can learn that no matter what, they can call upon the Lord and trust in him, that he has their best interest in mind, They will be able to get through some of the most unthinkable things in their life. They will be able to discern marriage. They will be able to discern the challenging circumstances they face with their own children. Pass on the gift of prayer. If you're a parent, maybe that's the one thing you can work on with your kids this Lent. Tomorrow, I'll tell you those things that we didn't have the opportunity to look at that you can do to help have your prayers be answered. Has Instagram created a new religion that young people actually do live by? This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. The group of those who identify with no religion, that is, the nuns, continue to grow. Tuesday, I'll discuss this, and we will also be joined by psychologist Dr. Gregory Bottaro to talk about Catholic mindfulness. Join me daily at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.